All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Incredible daf ahead of us today. Thank our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of El, Avraham Shaindy Kelman, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of their parents. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, and the family a Nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Jesse and Rivkah Meyerowitz, in honor of the birth of a baby boy to Shmuel and Shira Artman. We hope that the Artmans are Zocha, Lachniso Beviso Shalom Bizmano, and the Gadol Torah Ulechupa Ulemaisim Tovin. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Nun Aleph 51. We are picking up on Nun Amud Beis 50b, middle of the daf. I apologize about that. Is there another one? Oh, thank you. And also, Daf Yomi sponsorship by Saeed and Sima Haken in commemoration of the Yartsite of Saeed's father, Moshe ben Bashi Hakohen. Zichrono Livrach. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an Aliyah and the family a Nechama. Thank you, Saeed. Thank you. I have my hands full with one phone. I'm not. All right, so with that, let us begin. So Nun Amud Beis, we're picking up Mamish, middle of the page. Amar Yosef, Minami Nolas. We'll say, remember again, Minami Nedaba Hapligi. Literally middle of the daf Nun Amud Beis, but it's okay. It's a short daf, short Amud Aleph on 51. Right? So remember again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit. So we had an interesting machlokes. We had a brisa. The brisa was talking about whether or not the playing of the chalil, the playing of the flute, was docha Shabbos or not. So Rabbi Yossi held that the playing of the flute is docha Shabbos. Chachamim said the playing of the flute is not only not docha Shabbos, it's not even docha Yom Tiv. Rav Yosef wanted to say that the fundamental machlokus between the two of them was concerning what? Ikar Shira. We know that there is a mitzvah of Shira in the Beis HaMikdash, right? There's Levitic song in the Beis HaMikdash. The machlokes ultimately is as follows. Do we say Ikar Shira bepeh or Ikar Shira bekli? Is the primary Shira ultimately, again, just verbally? Or is the Ikar Shira ultimately with instruments? So Rabbi Yossi posits, that's the machlokes. Rabbi Yosef posits, that's the machlokes Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi says that the flute is docha Shabbos. He holds Ikar Shira Bekli. Ikar Shira Bekli. The Chachamim who say that the flute is not, playing of the flute is not docha Shabbos. Ultimately, again, he holds Ikar Shira Bepeh. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef ben Amina de Bahapligi. How do I know that this is their actual machlokas? This sanya, because we learned Kli Sharis Shasan Shal Eitz. What happens if you made a Kli Sharis, a service utensil, out of wood? Out of wood. So Rebbe Posel, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Machshir, Rebbe says it's possible, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says that it's kosher. Says the Gemara, my lav b'hakamiflagi. What are they arguing about? They both say, now remember, the Kli Sharis in question is an instrument. Can you make an instrument out of wood or not? So my lav b'hakamiflagi, man de machshir, savar ikar shira b'kli. The one who says ultimately again that it's kosher, he'll hold that ikar shira b'kli. The Gemara says, v'afinon me'abuva de Moshe. I want to say this is fascinating. Rashi points this out over here. If you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says, almost like right across in Rashi, man de machshir, eitz the chol kli sharis, the opinion who holds that you can make any service utensil out of wood. Where does he learn that from? Savar ikar shira b'kli. He holds that ikar shira b'kli, primary shira, is done with an instrument. V'havilu klei asher kli sharis. Therefore, instruments are considered to be a kli sharis. Right? So remember again, follow this train of thought. If you hold ikar shira b'kli, which means instruments are an indispensable part of the shira, that means that an instrument is a kli sharis, is a service utensil. Now watch this. Va'abuv haya b'mikdash mimos Moshe v'hu shel kana. Kedistan be'erechin. Supposed to listen to this. Apparently, they had a flute in the Beis HaMikdash from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. The flute was made out of reeds. Now, if you hold Ikar Shira B'Kli, and if you hold that, an instrument is a Kli Sharis, and you have an instrument that's made out of wood, that means what? Or made out of reeds, what wood we'll call it. Therefore, just like an instrument can be made out of wood, so to what? Any other Kli Sharis can be made from wood as well. Umad the Pasul, the one who says ultimately again a Kli Sharis made of wood will be Pasul, Savar Ikar Shira B'Peh. He will hold ultimately again, no, Ikar Shira B'Peh, not B'Kli. And therefore, v'lo yalfinon me'abuva de Moshe. And therefore, ultimately, again, we will not learn out anything from the flute of Moshe Rabbeinu. So to which the Gemara says, lo, actually that's not the machlokes. D'chuli alma eka shira b'kli. Everyone agrees that instruments are an indispensable part of the shira, and therefore, again, that makes an instrument, by the way, a kli sharis. So the Gemara says, v'hacha, this is very interesting, Bedanin afshar mishi'i afshar kamiflagi. We'll say here the shaila is, do we learn out a possible case from an impossible case? Now we'll say, now what does this mean? The Rashi points out over here, you can't really make a flute out of gold or silver. The Rashi points out they tried it, the sound wasn't the same. So you have to make a flute out of a reed. We'll call it out of eights. You have to make a flute out of eights. So the shaila now is, therefore it's afshar. You cannot go out and make a flute out of anything else. So the shaila is, knowing that I can't make a flute out of any other material, can I learn out the halachos of other klei sharis from a flute? So watch this. The Gemara says, Man de machshir, the one who holds that halacha l'maisa you can make any klei sharis out of wood. Savar danin afshar mishi afshar. He says you learn out possible situations from an impossible situation. In other words, we'll say it's only a flute that can't be made out of a precious metal. Everything else can be made out of a precious metal. But we say danin afshar mishi afshar. We learn the possible cases from the impossible cases. That if it's kosher to make a flute out of wood, you can make any other utensil out of wood as well. The Gemara says, man the puzzle, the one who says it's puzzle, he'll hold savar lo danin afshar mishi afshar. He holds we don't learn out the possible from the impossible. In other words, the reason a flute has to be out of wood is why? Because that's the only way to make it, right? But other utensils, that's not the case. So other klei, so it's true, the flute could be, even if you hold the flute is a kli shares, because ikar shira b'kli. At the end of the day, it's only the flute that can be made out of wood, because less breira, there's no other choice. But other utensils which can be made out of other materials, you absolutely must do so. So the Gemara says, the other possibility is, the kuli alma ikar shira b'peh. Everyone agrees primary shira is by mouth, not by instruments. Ve'ein danin afshar mishi'i afshar, and in general we don't learn out the possible from the impossible. V'hacha b'meilif menorah b'klali u'pratio b'riboy u'mi'ute kamiflagi. Bosi, what's the machlokes over here? The machlokes is how we learn out from menorah. Using menorah as a paradigm for kli shares, how do we extrapolate the paradigm from menorah? Do you use a klal u'prat or a riboy u'miut? We'll say two different exegetical principles. So watch this. Rebbe darish klali u'prati. Rebbe will darshin a klal u'prat. We'll define them in just a moment. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda darish riboy u'miute. Watch this. Rebbe darish klali u'prati. So Rebbe will look at menorah through the exegetical lens of a klal u'prat. So we'll say, watch this. Here we go. So the Gemara says, Miksha ta'aseh ha-menorah. You shall make the menorah out of one chunk of gold. Did I skip? I'm sorry, thank you. Vasisa menorahs, you shall make a menorah, klal. That's the general statement. Zahav tahor, out of pure gold, prat. That's right, that's a specific detail. Mikshet hasa menorah, you shall make it out of a block. Chazer v'kalal, that's another klal. So what is this? A klalu pratu klal. We'll say, how do you darshan a klal and a prat and a klal, right? A general statement, a limiting statement, or a specific idea, and then a general statement again. Right? When you have a klal, upratu klal, so ultimately again, the prat defines the klal. So the Gemara says, Ma prat mufura shamatachas, just like the prat, the specific detail over here by menorah is that it has to be metal, right, gold in this case. Afkol shamatachas, that teaches me about all other kli shares, it has to be matachas, it has to be made of a precious metal as well. That's Rebbe. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda darish riboy and mi'ute. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda will darshan a riboy and a mi'ut. How so? Vasisa menorah, you shall make a menorah, riba. Right? That's a riboy. Zahav tahar, pure gold. Mi'et, that is a limiting statement. Miksha tasa menorah, you shall make it miksha. Again, they're breaking up the phrases the same way. A block. Chazav riba. That's an inclusive statement again. So we'll say you have a riba, riboy umiut a riboy. Riba hakol. So in the exegetical of riboy miut riboy, so also remember again, klalu pratu klal, the prat defines the klal. Riboy miut riboy, ultimately again riba hakol. Everything is included. My Rabbi, what does it come to include? Rabbi kol mili. It comes to include any type of material for use in the creation of a kli shares. Umay miet, what does it come to? limit or exclude mi'et shel cheres. It does come to exclude one thing, which is earthenware. Although you can make a kli sharais out of any material, you cannot make it out of earthenware because that's considered to be just a lack of kavod for the utensil. Amar Papa says kitanoi top of Nun Aleph. In reality, this entire discussion is a machlokes tanoi. Now both say what entire discussion of ikar shira bepeh or bekli. Both say this is a fundamental machlokes. Right? I just want to point out what everybody agrees with. Everyone agrees that you need what? You need what? Shira. You have to have shira, right? Shira is an indispensable part of the karbanos, of the avoda, I should say. Right? And also everyone agrees that there were instruments. There were instruments. That's not a machlokes. The shaila is, are the instruments an indispensable part of the shira or not? Or no, the instruments are an accompaniment, but they're not the ikar. That's the machlokes. So it says, this is incredible. Disanyo, avdei kohanim hayu. Both say, listen to this. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Meir says, who played the instruments in the Beis HaMikdash? Who were the musicians? So Rabbi Meir says it was the servants. Listen to this. The avodim kinanim. Right? The avodim kinanim. The servants of the kohanim were the ones who went ahead and played the instruments. Right? Rabbi Yossi Omer, Mishpachas beis hapagrim, u Mishpachas beis tzifiria, u me'amum hayu, shayu masin lakuna. Rabbi Yossi says, no, they were Yisraelim. They weren't Avadim, they were Yisraelim, and again, these were the specific families, the families of Beis HaPagrim, right, or I should say the Pagrim family, the Tzifiria family, and they were from the city of Amaum. And ultimately, again, they had good yichus, and they were able to marry into the kahuna. But again, I just want to point out, according to Rabbi Yossi, they were Yisraelim. So according to Rabbi Meir, they were Avadim. According to Rabbi Yossi, they were Yisraelim. Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, or Leviim hayu. Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus says, no, the people who played the instruments were Leviim. So the Gemara says, so what's machlokes? So the Gemara says, so we'll say, this is actually a pretty amazing machlokes. You have Rabbi Meir saying it was Avodim Kinanim of Kohanim who played the instruments. You have Rabbi Yossi saying it was Yisraelim, but Yisraelim miyuchasim, right? Yisraelim with a good pedigree, right? A solid yichus. And Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus who's saying it was Leviim. What are they arguing about? So the one who says, i.e. Rabbi Meir, who holds that it was Avadim, he holds that the playing of instruments was not a pivotal part, was not a necessity in the Shira. Iker Shira bepeh, right? That's what Shira is. And ultimately the instruments are not a necessity. So pretty much what? Anyone can play the instruments because it's not really part of the avoda. The opinion, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, who says it was Leviim, he holds that no, ikar shira b'kli, that the primary shira does take place ultimately again with an instrument, and therefore it had to be Leviim. Okay, the Gemara says, well, v'tizbara, Rabbi Yossi makasar. We'll say, what about Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi was the opinion who said that halacha l'maisa they were Yisraelim miyuchasim. Right? They were Yisraelim, but with a solid pedigree. So, what does he hold? If he holds that Ikar Shira Bepeh, you don't need instruments at all, then you don't need Yisraelim Yuchasim. You can even use Avodim. Ikar Shira Bekli, Leviim in Yisraelim, no. But if you hold Ikar Shira Bekli that you do need instruments, then what? You need Leviim. So what does Rabbi Yossi hold when he says that it was Yisraelim who played the instruments? Ella dekuli alma ikar shira bepeh. Rather, the Gemara says no. Conclusion: everyone agrees that ikar shira bepeh. That ultimately, again, the primary shira was just sung by mouth. Right? You do not need instruments. Ubahakam iflagi. So what are they arguing about? The Gemara says the mar savar haki havamaisa. Umar Savar Haki Avamaisa. Well, so you know what they're arguing about? They're arguing about the Metzias. What happened? What happened in the Beis HaMikdash? That's what they're just arguing about. So the Gemara says, okay, Lamai Nafkamina, but if that's the case, who cares? In other words, if you're settling on the fact that Ikar Shira Bepeh, right? Primary Shira is done by mouth. You don't need instruments. Which both effectively means what? It doesn't actually matter what? Doesn't matter what? Who plays. So if that's the case, what are they arguing about? Well, they're arguing about what happened. Like historically, what happened? Well, who cares historically what? In other words, for our purposes, it doesn't matter. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why it matters. Lamay nafkamina, lema'alin miduchan liyuchsin ulemaiser. See, I will say what matters is as follows. What matters is halacha lemaisa. Do we elevate someone from the duchan, ultimately again to yuchsin and to maiser? We'll say the duchan refers to the steps. You know what? I realized I didn't send it out. I'm going to send you a picture of the Beis Hamikdash. Actually, I'm going to do it afterwards. So the duchan, maybe if you have a picture of the Beis Hamikdash available. So it's your screensaver, no? So what I'll just mention is as follows. Remember again, when you walk into the Azar, you walk into what we'll call the Ezras Nashim, the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. There would be 15 steps going to Shar Nikanor, and then a series of steps down. The Shira was sung. Now, on the Shar Nikanor was that gate that took you from what we call the Azara Ezras Nashim into Ezras Yisrael, and then ultimately again the Kodesh. Ezras Yisrael was on the other side of Shar Nikanor. It was right there. There was a platform there from where the Leviim would sing the Shira. So the Shaila over here is, if we see someone standing on that platform, could we assume that that's like a stempel, that is a seal of approval, a stamp on their yichus, and potentially even certifying the fact that they are part of Shevet Levi. So watch this, the Gemara says, Man damar avadim hayu kasavra imal lemiduchan liyuchsin v'lo lemaiser. So the first opinion, i.e. Rabbi Meir, held that the musicians were even avadim. The musicians were avadim. He holds that just because someone is on the duchan, someone is on the platform, well, that's why we call birchas kohen, we call it duchaning. We call it duchaning, right? Because historically, what would happen is the Kohanim would stand on the platform. Everybody, the Leviim would stand on the platform, and they would bless Klal Yisrael. That's why it's called duchaning. The duchan. Duchaning doesn't mean blessing. Duchaning means a platform. Duchan means a platform. So Rabbi Meir will hold that just because someone's on a platform, that's not a seal of approval on their yichus, nor does it entitle them to meiser, because after all, he holds that it was avodim who were the musicians. Uman Dharma Yisrael hayu, the one who says that it was Yisrael, kasavra ma'alin miduchan liyuchsin avalo lemeiser. He'll hold that halacha lemeiser. If someone's on the duchan, that's a good seal of approval on their genealogy, but will not entitle them to meiser. But the last Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, who says that it was Leviim who were playing the instruments, kasavra ma'alin miduchan bein liyuchsin bein lemeiser. He holds that halacha lemeiser. If you're on the duchan, that means that's a seal of approval both on your yichus as well as your membership in Shevet Levi. Incredible. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar Machlokes b'shir shel sho'iva. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says as follows: the Machlokes about whether or not the Chalil is Docha Shabbos. So again, we still have this general outline discussion, which we will get resolution on, about whether or not Ikar Shira b'peh, Ikar Shira b'kli. This is a very, very, very important yesod, which we will Emir Hashem discuss. So, right, what is primary shira? Does it require ultimately, again, only by mouth, or does it require instruments as well? That's still an outstanding machlokes. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is now going back. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, by the way, the machlokes that we saw before between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim about whether or not the Chalil, the playing of the flute, is docha Shabbos or not, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah suggests that's only a machlokes by the shir shel sho'iva. By ultimately, again, the playing of the flute, by the simchas beis sharabosa. This is going to become a little bit clearer in the next Mishnah. We're going to see that essentially there's the playing of instruments by the avoda, right, accompanying sacrificial service, and then there's the playing of the flute by the simchas beis sho'iva. This playing of the flute by simchas beis sho'iva was not avoda. It was not avoda. It was just there to amplify the simcha of the drawing of the water. So the Chalil, the flute really appears in two different contexts. It appears in an avoda context, and it appears in a simchas beis sho'iva context. Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to suggest the machlokes about whether or not the flute is docha Shabbos is in the flute of the beis sho'iva. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savra simcha yiser nami docha Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says the additional simcha of the water drawing of the nitzach hamayim is docha Shabbos. For Rabbanan Savri simcha yisera in the docha Shabbos. And the Rabbanan will say that Simcha Yisera, right, that additional Simcha of the Chalil by the Beis HaShoiva, that is not Docha Shabbos. Avol, b'shir shal karban. When it comes to the actual shira of karban, actual mandated shira, divrei akol avodahi v'dochas haShabbos. Everyone agrees that in that case, right, the playing of the instruments is part of the avoda, and it is dochas Shabbos. The Gemara said, Meisvei, after there's a kasha on that, shir shal shoeva dochas haShabbos Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. So right, the Brisa says, the shir shal shoeva is dochas Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi, Chamim Omrim Af Yom Tiv Eino Docha, and ultimately again, Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim say it's not Docha Yom Tiv. Shabbos said this pretty much refutes Rabbi Yosef. Tiyufta to Rabbi Yosef, Tiyufta. Good, that refutes the position, effectively refutes the position of Rabbi Yosef. Lema b'shir shel sho'ev huda pligi, aval b'shir shel karban divrei akol dochas Shabbos. So maybe we'll say that it's only in the shir shel sho'eva that they argue, but in regular shir shel karban, everyone will agree that the instruments are dochas Shabbos. Lema tevet tiyufta to Rabbi Yosef betarti. If that's the case, it would refute Rabbi Yosef on two counts. Rabbi Yosef pligi b'shir shel sho'eva v'odin lekarban. In reality, Rabbi Yosef and the Chachamim, Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim disagree both in the shir shel sho'eva and the shir of karban. And that's which we frame the machlokes about the shir shel sho'eva. Ultimately, again, we only framed it that way to show you the strength of Rabbi Yossi's position, that he even holds that the shir of sho'eva is docha Shabbos. V'ha katani zechalil shel beis hasho'eva she'ena docha lo Shabbos lo yom tov. When we spoke about the fact that the chalil of the beis hasho'eva is not docha Shabbos, not docha yom tov, zel eino docha aval karban docha, which means that this flute is not docha Shabbos of the beis hasho'eva, but the flute of the avoda of the shira of karban is docha Shabbos. Money, whose opinion does that reflect? Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. If it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, ha'amar shir sho'eva nami docha. He holds that halacha l'maisa the shir of sho'eva is also docha Shabbos, not just the shir of karban. Elav rabbanon. Rather, it must be the rabbanon utiyufta Rabbi Yossi petarti tiyufta. And this would refute Rabbi Yossi's interpretation of macholkes on both accounts. And indeed, this is a refutation. My taimo demand damar ikr shir b'kli. So we'll say. So remember again. So now that there's two machloksim over here. There's the ikr shir b'kli machlokes, and then ultimately, again, there's when are instruments docha Shabbos and Yom Tiv. Is it just by avoda, or is it even by beis hasho'eva? So now the Gemara kind of dials us back a little bit and says, "My time of demand amar ikar shir b'kli." What's the root of the opinion who says that instruments are an indispensable part of the shira? Tichsiv, quotes the pasuk over here. Quotes the pasuk from Divrei Yomim. V'yomer Chizkiyo, lalos ha'ola lamizbeach, u'be'eis ha'chel ha'ola, hechel shir Hashem, v'achatzosros v'al yidei klei David melech Yisrael. So we'll say Chizkiyo says, bring up the karban. And again, you see the chatzotros and the klei David. What are the klei David? Right, the instruments of David. Those are the instruments. So you see over here that instruments ultimately again are part of the shira accompanying the karban. My time the mandamar ikr shir b'peh. So what's the reason for the opinion who says that aloch l'maisa ikr shir b'peh? You don't need instruments. Tichsiv vahi ke'echad lemechatzatzrim u'lemeshorerim lashmiya kol echad. Because both see here over here that the people who play the trumpets and the singers are reckoned separately. So you see from here, since the singers are mentioned on their own, that singing by itself, even without instruments, is the shira. So I'll say, what does the opinion who says ikar shira b'peh, what does he do with the pasuk by Chizkiah? Haksiva yomer Chizkiah. Hachi, this is how he interprets it. Hechel shir Hashem b'peh. Al Yidei Klei David Melech Yisrael Levasumei Kola. He will say that ikar shir b'peh and Chizkiah ordered the playing of the instruments. Why? To beautify the shira. In other words, no one will disagree that instruments beautify the shira, but ultimately, again, Chizkiah wasn't saying to bring the instruments because ikar shira b'kli. He was just saying bring the instruments in order to beautify the shira. V'idach nami haksiv v'yikeh echal mechatzes u'nushorim. What is the opinion who says that ikar shira b'kli? What does he do with the pasuk that seems to support the idea of ikar shira b'peh? L'mishorerim, the singers are reckoned on their own. Hachi, this is what it means to say mishorerim dumya demechatzatzrim. Ultimately, again, singers like people who play the trumpet. Ma mechatzatzrim b'kli, just like the trumpet players use a kli, af mishorerim b'kli. So too ultimately the singers must be accompanied by a kli as well. So we'll say, there's so much interesting halacha to do over here, which we don't really have time for, but what I do want to resolve is as follows. So how do we paskin? Right? Don't worry, by the way, we are right on schedule. I just want to know we are fine. Right, so we'll say, how do we paskin halacha l'maisa? So the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Beis Hamikdash, Hilchos Beis Habechira, see paskins, this is in Parag Gimel Halacha Gimel. The Rambam paskins, Ve'ein omrim shira ela bepeh, below kli, she'ikar hashira shi avodasan bepeh. The Rambam paskins, ikar shira bepeh. Ikar shira, that's how he passed in Halacha L'maisa, that the ikar shira was done by mouth. Now again, I want to point out, everybody agrees there were instruments there, but ikar shira bepeh. And interesting, the Rambam writes, "Va'acherim hayu omdim sham umenagdim klei shir." Other people were there who played instruments. Now, what does it mean when he says other people? What does it mean other people? Other people means, Rabbi said, you don't need the orchestra to be what? To be Leviim. Therefore, the Rambam says, Mehem Leviim, Umehen Yisraelim, Miyuchasin lekahuna. Now, what the Rambam does say, it could be Leviim, or it could be Yisraelim Miyuchas. In other words, to be in the Beis Hamikdash orchestra and to stand on the Duchan, ultimately, again, you have to either be a Levi or a Yisrael with a proper pedigree. You don't bring up Avadim. And the reason for that is the Rambam says, She'in Ola Ela Duchan, Ela Miyuchas. Ultimately, again, only someone who's miyuchas could come onto the duchan. So again, that's how he passed halacha l'maisa. Ikar shira bepeh. Ikar shira bepeh. Now, in terms of, we also paskin that klei sharis. Remember the machlokes before? Can you make a klei sharis out of wood or metal? Rambam paskins again. Hilchos Beis Habechira Parak Aleph Halacha Yud Ches. You could only make klei sharis out of precious metals. Klei sharis cannot be made of wood. What about the flute? What about the flute? The abuva of Moshe? That's Yav Shar. That is what it is. Other halacha, but let's go a little bit weiter first in the Gemara. Both say Mishnah. Both say we are about to begin. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just probably one of the most beautiful sugyas in the Gemara. Look at this. Here we go. Mishnah. Mishla ra simchas beis hashoev la ra simcha miyamav. Well, so probably just coming attractions. In Meretz Hashem, we're going to have the Sima for Succah, Meretz Hashem over Sukkos. Right? We'll make a little shir simchas beis hashoeva, and we'll chazer this piece together as part of our Sima in Meretz Hashem. So Misha lo ra simchas beis hashoeva lo ra simcha miyamav. Someone who did not see the simchas beis hashoeva. Remember, we learned in the last Mishnah, what is the simchas beis hashoeva? It was the celebration that centered around the drawing of the water. Remember again, where do they draw the water from? We spoke about this. The Shiloach, right? The Shiloach spring, which is the spring in Yerushalayim. They right outside the Beis Hamikdash. They went ahead and, I will say, again, I mentioned this before, when you go like on the Ir David tour, and you go in the tunnels, the water tunnels, that water is from the Shiloach spring. So they would go ahead, so there was a whole celebration around the drawing of the water. So anyone who did not see Simchas Beis HaShoeva never saw Simcha in his life. So we'll say, what would they do? Listen to this. B'matzei Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Yardu LaEzras Nashim. On Matzei Yom Tov, on the first day, right? On the Matzei Yom Tov, on the second night of Yom Tov, right? To say simple, right? On Matzei Yom Tov Rishon, what would they do? Yardu LaEzras Nashim. They went to the women's courtyard. I will say, now, where the Beis Hamikdash is, there a women's courtyard. We'll see what we call the Azara, which is the primary courtyard that you walk into when you walk into the Beis Hamikdash. They called that the Ezras Nashim, right? The women's section. It wasn't the whole thing, wasn't the women's section. We'll see what happened there. Umitaknin Sham Tikun Gadol. They make an important enactment. We'll see exactly what they did over there. Menorah Shalzav Hayusham. There were golden menorahs. Then I will say, now really, if you could imagine this, it's almost like a street lamp we're going to see with 4 huge bulbs. And each of those bulbs were filled with olive oil. The Gemara said, Menoro shalzav hayusham va'arbas falim shalzav barashem. Each of the poles had 4 receptacles for olive oil. Va'arba sulamas l'cholecha. They were high up, so in order to reach each bowl, you had to climb a ladder. Va'achad, so the Gemara says, l'cholecha v'echad. Va'arba yeladim mafrichei kuna. And remember again, there was one child, right? By the way, we write a lot of avoda for the children to do, right? They're cleaning up the grape residue, right? A couple of days ago, now Baruch Hashem, they're filling. So, right, the children, the young Kohanim they would have one Kohen assigned to each. I don't know what the right word is. I'll call it bowl, receptacle. But you have the image. I don't know. I looked for a picture, Moshe, on the Daf. I couldn't find one. But all right, I don't know if my Gemara didn't have a picture either. But it's pretty easy to visualize. It's just a pole, if you could imagine again, with 4 large receptacles. So you had a ladder leading up to each receptacle. One young Kohen would be assigned to each receptacle. Ubiyadim kadim shlameh ve'esrim lug, and they each had a jug of oil. Now, each jug wasn't 120 lug. In other words, it was 120 lug per lamp post, so to speak, right? So in other words, 30 lug per receptacle. Shematil l'chol safal v'safal mivloi michsei kohanim u'memnehem mehen hayu mafkiin u'bahen hayu madlikin. So we'll say, what would they use for wicks? They would use the worn-out clothing of the Kohanim, right, and the worn-out belts. So they would make wicks out of the worn-out clothing. Quite beautiful. So listen to how beautiful this is. The light was so strong in the Beis Hamikdash that there wasn't a home in Yerushalayim that wasn't illuminated by the light of the Beis Hamikdash. So also take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Shelo haisa meira ma'ar Beis Hashoeva lefi shamenoros gavoim 50 ama v'harabayis gavoa va'ora zorachas b'chol ha'ir. So we'll say, do you understand how beautiful this is? He says v'kosel mizrachi shulasov ezras nashim hayanamoch. See, I will say, remember, the lampposts were tall. The Beis Hamikdash was situated on top of a mountain. The eastern wall was lower. So therefore, again, that line, can you imagine just that scene? Can you imagine just looking at that, right? You look, you're in Yerushalayim, you look towards the Makom HaMikdash, and what do you see? You just see like one bastion of radiant light. Imagine that, the light of the Beis Hamikdash. Can you imagine the light of the Beis Hamikdash filling all of Yerushalayim and being able to look at that at night? Remember, again, this is happening at night. So literally, again, the entire night is illuminated by the Beis Hamikdash. There wasn't a home in Yerushalayim that wasn't illuminated from the Ar Beis HaShoeva. Chasid v'Anshe Maisa. So the Chasidim, right, the pious ones, Anshe Maisa, we'll see who these people are. Hayu meraktin b'fneihem. They would dance in front of the general populace. So we'll see everybody was assembled. Everybody was there. So who was providing entertainment? It was the Gedolei Hadar, right? It was the Gedolei Hadar. We'll see who were dancing in front of the populace. Ba'avukos shel ar shebiyadehen. And what were they doing? This is amazing. They were juggling fire. Now, I feel like I juggle fire every day also, but that's different issues. Right? Let's say they were literally juggling fire in front of the populace. And they were singing in front of them beautiful songs and praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Levim are playing all kinds of instruments. I will say, the Levim are playing instruments, more instruments than you could even count. And remember again, they were playing the instruments on the 15 steps, right, that led essentially from Shar Nikanor, which is that doorway that leads into the Kodesh, right, on the steps, but in front of Shar Nikanor, the 15 steps leading down between what we call Ezras Yisrael and Ezras Noshim. Keneged Chamish Esrei Malosh V'Tilim. But so are there 15 steps? 15 steps corresponding to the 15 Shir HaMalos Kapitloch in Sefer Tilim. We'll discuss that. Shaleim Leviim Omdim Beklei Shir V'Om Shira V'Omdu Shnei Kohanim B'Shara Elyon. And there were 2 Kohanim who stood by Shar Nikanor, right? The upper gate is Shar Nikanor. Also, remember again, Shar Nikanor is the gateway, right? Is the gateway into the Kodesh, right? Just so to orient you, you walked into the Azara, you walked up 15 steps, you got to a platform, you went through Shar Nikanor, you went down another set of steps. Right in front of you was what? Right in front of you was the Mizbeach. the large outer animal altar, right? Animal sacrifice altar. You would walk around that, you would walk into the ulam, walk into the kodesh, hit the curtain of the kodesh, just to orient you. So there were two kohanim who were sitting b'shar nikanar, sheyarim ezras Yisrael, ezras nashim, ushnei chatzos shros biadei, and they were holding two trumpets. Kara hagever, the gever, right? It was you saw him by Yuma, right? The crier. He called out, Tiku v'hariu v'tiku. Go ahead, blow tekiah, trua tekiah. Higiu lamala, asiris. They would come down to the 10th step. We'll discuss which 10th step that was. Taku v'hariu v'taku. They blew another tekiah, trua tekiah. Higiu la'azara. They got to the floor of the azara, the courtyard. Taku v'hariu v'taku. Ultimately, again, they blew another tekiah, trua tekiah. Hayu tokin v'holchin. Ad shemagia l'shar hayotzim mizrach. So we'll say, you understand like what's happening over here, right? The Levim are playing instruments beyond count, right? The Chasidim and Anshe Meiser are juggling fire and singing shiros and shbachos. All of Klal Yisrael is there. The Kohanim now begin to lead the populace towards the shar hayotzim mizrach, towards the eastern gate, right? Towards the eastern gate of the Beis Hamikdash. They got to the eastern gate. They turned from east to west, which means now, if you could imagine, they're facing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Facing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And they said, our forefathers who were in this place, Rashi points out that during the end of the Second Temple era, people were very steeped in sun worship. So they were saying, our ancestors unfortunately turned their back on you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, turned their back on the Beis Hamikdash and faced the sun in order to worship the sun. Va'anu leka einenu. But us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our eyes are to you. Rabbi Huda says, Hayushonin va'omrim anu leka ve'leka einenu. They would repeat and say, we are to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to you are our eyes. We'll say, this is the scene of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. So I will say, tell me, does this not make you yearn for the Beis HaMikdash? When you read something like this, right? When you read something like this and you see this imagery and you feel, even from the words of the Mishnah, the simcha is palpable, right? You could feel it. Just reading the words, you feel yourself filled with such incredible simcha, such incredible joy. And the notion of the light of the Beis HaMikdash filling Yerushalayim, that literally, again, it was light in the middle of the night. And it's so beautiful, and it's so lebedig, and the instruments, and the Kohanim leading us out. Anu leka ve'einenu leka. Kadosh Baruch Hu, we are yours. You feel it, and you want it. And Emir Hashem, Bekarav B'Yameinu, it will be ours again. Tan Rabbanan, what says in the beautiful Gemara, Misha lo ra simchas beis hashoeva, lo ra simcha miyamav. So beautiful. We're going to discuss this more, but the Brisa says, whoever did not see the simchas beis hashoeva never saw simcha. Never saw. If you want to know what simcha is the simchas beis hashoeva. Similarly, again, the Gemara says, Misha lo ra Yerushalayim b'tifarta. Whoever did not see Yerushalayim in its grandeur, lo ra krach nechmad me'olam, has never seen a beautiful city in his entire life. But say, after 1967, when Yerushalayim was taken back by its rightful owners, right, by the Jewish people, so people came to Rabbi Silber and they asked, this was actually a number of years afterwards, and they asked that on Tisha B'Av we should stop saying Nachem. Right? In Nachem we speak about Yerushalayim, we call it the Ir HaBezuya, Shomema Mikol Banav, right? It's not, right? First of all, this was not 1967, this was a number of years later. When again the city was rebuilt, you go to Yerushalayim is a beautiful city. It's a beautiful city. And yet we go ahead and we see on Tisha B'Av that Yerushalayim, it's degraded, it's bereft of its children. So they said to the Rav, maybe we should stop going ahead and saying Nachem. And Rabbi Silber quoted this Gemara, and he said Yerushalayim is beautiful, Yerushalayim is magnificent, but the Yerushalayim of today is not what Yerushalayim was, and not what Yerushalayim will be. Which I will say is such a beautiful thing, because again, what I wouldn't give to be in Yerushalayim now. But when we get there again, we're often overwhelmed by the beauty of Yerushalayim, and just the knowledge that what it is now is like doesn't hold a candle to what it will be. It doesn't mean that Mamila is going to be 5 times bigger. That's not what it means. But like the notion that the beauty, and it has so much beauty, that what it is now is just a fraction of what it'll be is so amazing to contemplate. Similarly, the Gemara says, Misha lo ra'a beis hamikdash bevinyano. Someone who did not see a built Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash when it was built, this is beautiful. Lo ra'a binyan mafur me'olam, has never seen a beautiful building. Isn't this incredible? In other words, there are plenty of beautiful buildings, but if you haven't seen the Beis Hamikdash built, then you've never seen a beautiful building. What was so beautiful about the Beis Hamikdash? In other words, we know it was a grand building, but what was like this defining feature that made it so beautiful? Amar Abaye, v'tim Rav Chisda, Zeh binyan hordus. So we'll say, this is actually quite interesting. What does this refer to? This refers to a structure built by Herod. Now we'll say, Herod was an interesting guy, and that's putting it mildly. Right? B'pashtus, he probably was schizophrenic. But Lamaisa, he pretty much wiped out the entire Sanhedrin, felt bad afterwards, and as a gesture, say, you know what, let me take on your building campaign, right? Let me go ahead. Now, he did a great job on the building campaign, right? Remember again, right, with the temple plaza as we had it was because of Herod, and the building, the structure that Herod built was something of magnificence. So the Gemara says, so what was so special about it? The Gemara says, "B'may banye." What did he build it with? So Rava Amar ba'avnei shisha umirma. Rava says he built it with avnei shisha or shaisha. This ultimately again is like a greenish type of marble. Umirma. Mirma is white marble. So it was a combination of greenish marble and white marble. Ikeda Amri. Others say ba'avnei shisha kochla umirma. Others say no, it was like a bluish green marble and a white marble. Va'ayel Safa, so Gemara's Apik Safa, Va'ayel Safa. So it was a bluish green white marble altogether. And this is very interesting. Shabbos say he didn't pile the stones one on top of the other. Instead, what he did was one layer was recessed and one layer was regular. He did that so that he could put the plaster on the back of the stones as opposed to in between the stones. Because if the plaster is in between the stones, then what? You could see it. He didn't want the plaster to be seen when you looked. Plaster is the wrong word. I mean plaster. What do you put in between the stones to keep them together? Grout or cement. Whatever it is you're doing to keep the stones together. He didn't want that to be visible on the facade. So what he did is one layer recessed, one layer, we'll call it regular, right? And he put the binder on the back. This way the stones, so the Gemara says, Ki hechi dilakabel sida savar lemishan bidava. So Herod said to the remaining rabbis, I'd like to cover the entire Beis Hamikdash with gold. Which I would say, if you can imagine the amount of wealth that he possessed. He said, as another gesture, it's marble now, but I'd like to make it of gold. But listen to this. Amali Rabbanon Shavke. The Rabbanon said, no, leave it. Why? What were they so taken by? The Hachi Shapir Tvei. They said we like the Beis Hamikdash as it is. Why? Because the Beis Hamikdash, the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, give the image of the waves of the sea. Which I will say, think about this. Just think about this just a moment. Can you imagine, like you're walking towards the Beis Hamikdash, the facade is a combination of green, blue, white marble. And again, remember, if you have different layers, right? One is recessed, one is regular. It mamish looks like the ocean. It looks like the waves of the sea. Now, there's a beautiful piece in the Zohar about this idvis sadiyama. We don't have time for it, but I owe it to you. But this is what Chazal they wanted. The Beis Hamikdash to look like the ocean. So therefore, the Gemara says, if you have not seen the Beis Hamikdash, you've never seen a truly beautiful structure. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishal Ra, Diuflustun Shal Alexandria Shal Mitzrayim. Lo ra'a bichvodan shal Yisrael. What's another interesting Gemara here? Well, let's begin this. Whoever did not see the Diuflustun of Alexandria, this is Alexandria, Egypt. They will say, what's Diuflustun? So we'll see ultimately again. Rashi says over here, Lashon Yavanis Dioshnayim pa Lashon Sarim Kimo Metropolin Kimo Diuflustun Miromi Tanis. This we're going to see refers to a large basila, a large structure. Whoever did not see the Diuflustun of Alexandria has never truly seen a beautiful structure. So the Gemara says, I should say, has never seen the true covet of Klal Yisrael. Amru, kamin basilki gedola haisa. There was like a large basila. We'll say this is referring, by the way, we're going to see, to like the primary shul in Alexandria. Stav lifnim nistav. There were rows of benches inside other rows of benches. Pamim shahayu ba shishim riba shishim ro kifayim kiotzim. It was so large that it was able to accommodate twice as many Jews who left Egypt. Now that's a bit hyperbolic, right? Because there are 600,000 of them between the ages of 20 and 60 who left. But what is it saying? What is it saying? It was big. It was big, and it was really big. It was really big. V'hayu ba ayin aleph kitadro shel zav keneged ayin aleph shel sanhedrin gedola. The community in Alexandria almost made pretty much like their own Sanhedrin. They made their own Sanhedrin. Again, this wasn't a breakaway. We'll discuss the community of Alexandria was established before the fall of the first Beis HaMikdash. They saw what was coming. They decided to go ahead and escape from Nebuchadnezzar. They went to Alexandria. So this wasn't like a breakaway Sanhedrin. They were just reestablishing Jewish life in Alexandria. Rashi says over here, Sanhedrin. They made for themselves a Sanhedrin. So the Gemara is finding, so they had 71 chairs of gold corresponding to the 71 members of the Sanhedrin. And each chair was at least 21,000 kikari zav. So I will say, this is the wealth of the community in Alexandria. And there was a large wooden platform in the middle of the shul. So I will say, this is the famous mice in the shul of Alexandria that was so big that people couldn't hear the chazan. Now, often in shuls, people can't hear the chazan. This goes back to Rabbi Silber because they're talking. This was because ultimately, again, the shul was so large. So the chazan HaKnesses would stand in the middle on a platform, and he would literally wave a flag when it was time to say Amen. He would wave flags. We'll say, all right, we're out of time. We'll have to stop here for today. But, right? Incredible daf. And Miras Hashem, we're going to pick up tomorrow on Shabbos' daf with more discussion about the community in Alexandria and more discussion about the Simchas Beis HaShoeva.